Sometimes the most ordinary nights carry the weight of extraordinary change. A man in jeans and a hoodie, stopping for gas after a long day at the hospital with his mother. Two officers circling under harsh fluorescent lights, suspicious not because of what he did, but because of who he was. That night, Marcus Holloway was not seen as a judge, a father, or a son. He was seen only as a black man in the wrong place, at the wrong time. But destiny has a way of turning injustice into a stage for truth. The very next morning, in a courtroom filled with whispers and cameras, Marcus would rise not as a victim, but as the one with the gavel face to face with the same men who had pressed his cheek against cold steel. This is not just the story of one arrest. It is the story of dignity stripped and reclaimed, of silence turned into a voice that could not be ignored, and of justice reminding us all. It may bend under pressure, but it never disappears. Marcus Holloway never thought an ordinary Tuesday evening could alter the course of his life. He was a respected judge, 45 years old, known in Philadelphia courts for his calm voice and unwavering fairness. Yet on that night, he wasn't in a robe or behind a bench. He was simply a son who had spent the day at the hospital, keeping watch over his mother after her heart surgery. Dressed in jeans, sneakers, and a navy hoodie, he stopped at a gas station before heading home, his mind heavy with worry and relief that she had made it through. It's a small detail, but it matters. We often forget that authority, titles, or status do not shield anyone from how the world perceives them in vulnerable moments. For Marcus, being out of uniform meant he was no longer Judge Holloway in the eyes of strangers. He was just another black man standing under bright fluorescent lights in a predominantly white suburb, and that was enough to draw suspicion. The lesson here is one many of us recognize in our own lives. Dignity can be fragile when seen through the wrong lens. Think of a time when you were misjudged, simply because of how you looked, where you were, or what you wore. Maybe it was walking into a store and feeling the eyes of suspicion follow you, or being spoken to in a way that made you feel smaller than who you truly are. These moments remind us how deeply assumptions can wound, even when no words are spoken. For Marcus, the gas station became a mirror of countless testimonies he had heard in his courtroom stories he had listened to as a judge, but now was living in real time as a man. And this is where his journey begins, not with a robe of authority, but with the quiet courage of someone about to face humiliation and turn it into a story of justice. Because what started as an ordinary night was about to ignite something extraordinary, leading us to the first sparks of conflict that no one could have predicted. Marcus was still adjusting the gas nozzle when he noticed the patrol car circling slowly, its headlights sweeping over the nearly empty lot like a predator scanning for prey. Inside sat Officers Brennan and Reynolds, two men in their early 30s with crew cuts and hard expressions that spoke of authority too often unchecked. To them, Marcus was not a father heading home, nor a son exhausted from hours in a hospital waiting room. He was simply a black man in a hoodie, standing at a gas pump in a white suburb. That was enough. They pulled in behind his car, blocking him from leaving. He felt the shift immediately. The air grew heavier, his heartbeat quickened, and the night that had been quiet suddenly pulsed with tension. "Good evening, officers," Marcus said calmly, his voice measured, as if politeness could shield him from what was coming. But Brennan's tone was sharp, dripping with suspicion. "We've had reports of robberies in the area. Mind telling us what you're doing here?" The absurdity stung. Marcus glanced at the nozzle in his hand, gasoline flowing into the tank, the obvious answer hanging between them. Still, he replied evenly, "Just getting gas on my way home from the hospital. My mother had surgery." But the explanation did nothing to soften the suspicion in their eyes. They demanded identification, ignoring his words, brushing aside his humanity. And when Marcus identified himself as a judge, Brennan let out a mocking laugh. "Sure you are. And I'm the police commissioner." In that moment, the badge was no longer a symbol of service. It was a weapon, sharpened by prejudice, used to turn an ordinary act into a supposed crime. They grabbed his arm, slammed him against the cold steel of his BMW, and handcuffed him while accusing him of resisting, though his every move was deliberate, calm, careful. The humiliation burned deeper than the pressure of the cuffs. And perhaps most painful of all was the recognition. This was not new. He had read these stories in reports, heard them from defendants, and witnessed the pain etched on faces in his courtroom. Now he was living it. The lesson here is chilling yet clear. Authority without accountability can strip dignity in an instant. When bias fuels suspicion, even the law itself can be turned against those it was meant to protect. How many times have ordinary people faced that same stare of suspicion, the same unjust escalation? For Marcus, it was not the pain of being restrained, but the knowledge that truth and credentials meant nothing against the prejudice of perception. And as he was shoved into the back of the cruiser, his car shrinking in the rearview mirror, he realized this was bigger than a single encounter. This was about a system that saw color first and humanity second. That night, the badge had become a weapon. But the story was only beginning, and justice, though bruised and bound, was not yet defeated. At the station, Marcus stepped into a world designed to strip humanity with efficiency. Harsh fluorescent lights, the cold echo of shoes against linoleum, the indifference of faces that had processed thousands before him. To the booking sergeant, Marcus was just another body to categorize, another suspect to strip of belongings and dignity. Name? The sergeant asked flatly. Marcus Holloway, judge with the Philadelphia County Court of Common Pleas, he replied, voice steady. Laughter rippled in the room. A judge? In jeans and a hoodie? Surely another man making excuses. They took his wallet, his belt, his shoes. Each item removed was another piece of identity erased. What Marcus felt most acutely wasn't just the physical discomfort of handcuffs or cold floors, it was the realization that in this space, titles and accomplishments evaporated. Here, he was only black, and therefore suspect. And yet, there was a shift. A younger officer, Jackson, froze when he saw Marcus. Recognition lit his face. Judge Holloway, I know you. You gave a lecture at the academy on constitutional rights. The room fell silent, the weight of realization settling like a stone. Suddenly, Marcus was no longer just another man in custody. He was someone they should have known better than to humiliate. But by then, the damage was done. The cuffs had bitten his wrists. The cold steel of the car door had pressed against his cheek. The humiliation had already taken root. The booking sergeant's dismissive tone, Brennan's mocking laugh, Reynolds' hand on his weapon each moment had left a mark deeper than bruises. And yet, within that silence, something important emerged. Exposure. Their treatment of him could no longer be hidden, explained away, or dismissed as rumor. It was witnessed, documented, and undeniable. The machine that processed people without question had faltered because, for once, its victim had a voice loud enough to echo beyond those walls. The lesson here is sobering. Systems don't fail by accident. They are built to function exactly as designed. And unless challenged, they will continue grinding down dignity, case after case, night after night. Marcus saw this truth more clearly than ever. He had been both judge and victim, both authority and suspect, and that collision of roles would soon become the very catalyst for change. When Marcus finally returned home, it wasn't relief that greeted him but a storm. His children, Jamal and Zora, had already seen the video circulating online. Grainy footage of their father, a judge, being shoved against his car, mocked, and cuffed. His wife Vanessa stood at the kitchen counter, phone in hand, her lawyer's mind racing through strategies even as her heart ached with worry. "We can file suit immediately," she said, anger sharp in her voice. "Civil rights violations, emergency injunction, this is textbook profiling." But Marcus shook his head. Not yet. What he wanted, more than quick retaliation, was something deeper, accountability that could not be dismissed as just another lawsuit. His children's eyes told the story more than words ever could. Jamal repeated the lessons his father had taught him about staying calm if stopped by police, keep your hands visible, say yes sir and no sir, and ask before reaching. Zora added softly, "But you did all that, Dad, and it didn't matter." The weight of that truth pressed down on Marcus harder than the cuffs had. What kind of world forced children to rehearse survival scripts for encounters with those sworn to protect them? The home that had always been his refuge now felt invaded by fear and anger. Yet within that storm, a seed of resolve was planted. Marcus would not let this end with humiliation. He would not allow his children's fear to go unanswered. He would find a way to turn this pain into something larger than himself. Something that might, finally, force the system to look in the mirror. And so, while Vanessa drafted legal notes and the children clung to his side, Marcus sat at his desk, studying judicial ethics, researching precedents, and realizing that fate had positioned him for a confrontation he could not have imagined just hours earlier. Morning arrived with headlines blazing. Philadelphia judge arrested at gas station. The video had gone viral overnight, shared across social media, dissected on news programs, and debated in living rooms. Calls came from colleagues urging him to step aside, to take time off, to let others handle the fallout. But when Marcus checked the docket, his heart skipped. The hearing scheduled for that day involved police misconduct, specifically officers Brennan and Reynolds. Fate had not only humiliated him, it had placed him directly in judgment over his abusers. The conflict was immediate. Should he recuse himself, avoiding even the appearance of bias, or should he remain, bringing first-hand understanding of the very injustices the case exposed? Friends advised caution. The police union demanded recusal. The district attorney's office whispered about impropriety. But Marcus knew. Stepping aside would mean another quiet dismissal, another case buried in bureaucracy. Remaining meant risk, but it also meant possibility. He chose the fire. He would stay, but he would not do so recklessly. He appointed an independent auditor to review data on traffic stops, ensuring transparency. He prepared arguments rooted not in anger, but in precedent and principle. He knew the scrutiny would be relentless, yet he also knew this was bigger than him. If he recused himself, what message would that send to every black man and woman who had stood before him, telling stories of profiling, abuse, humiliation? Could even a judge demand justice when targeted? He would not surrender. He would not let this moment slip away. The stage was set. The fire was waiting. And Marcus, bruised but unbroken, was ready to walk into it. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Marcus took his seat. For most people, the bench is a place of distance and power. But today, it felt like armor, shielding him from the storm of eyes officers in uniform, reporters with cameras, citizens clutching signs that demanded justice. At the front tables, Antoine Johnson, a young black nursing assistant, sat nervously with his lawyer. Across from him, Brennan and Reynolds whispered with their union attorney, their faces pale under the harsh lights. Marcus opened the file, the ink of the complaint pages heavy with meaning. Antoine had been pulled over weeks earlier, accused of a broken taillight that mechanics later proved was working. The stop escalated, the familiar refrain, furtive movements, resisting arrest. Words Marcus had seen countless times before. But today, those words echoed differently, because he had lived them. The defense tried to keep the case narrow, insisting it was just one man's word against two officers. But then the data arrived. A statistician, calm and methodical, presented charts showing that in Abington Township, black drivers were stopped at 5 times the rate of white drivers, even after accounting for crime rates and neighborhood demographics. The numbers were irrefutable, glowing red flags on the screen for all to see. Then came the linguist, dissecting the officers' reports. Words like furtive, matched the description, appeared nervous. Phrases that sounded official but were little more than code. Code that gave officers cover, code that justified suspicion without evidence, code that turned being black into being suspect. As the testimony unfolded, Marcus felt the weight of recognition in the room. Many citizens had long suspected these patterns. Today, the veil was torn away. Excuses no longer held power when data laid the truth bare. The lesson here is simple but vital. Numbers don't lie, but people often do. When systems rely on vague language and unchecked power, data becomes the witness that cannot be intimidated, silenced, or mocked. For Marcus, it was vindication. His own humiliation was not an isolated event. It was a symptom of a deeper disease. And now, for the first time, the courtroom walls echoed with truth that could not be brushed aside. Justice was beginning to speak, and this time, it had the force of evidence behind it. The phrase, blue wall of silence, is not just a metaphor, it's a lived reality, officers, protecting each other at all costs, no matter the truth. But on this day, cracks began to appear. It started quietly, with Officer Reynolds shifting uneasily in his seat. He whispered urgently to his lawyer, glancing at Brennan, then at the judge. Minutes later, during a recess, word spread like wildfire. Reynolds wanted to talk. In Marcus's chambers, away from the noise, Reynolds confessed, "We were told how to write our reports, use the magic words, furtive movements, high crime area, and the stop sticks. Doesn't matter if there's no real suspicion. That's how we're trained, not in the academy, but on the street. His voice trembled, a mixture of fear and release. He revealed group chats where officers shared memes mocking minorities, boasted about quotas, and joked about padding arrest numbers. For years, he had played along. But facing Marcus, the man he had cuffed just the night before, the weight of guilt cracked something inside him. When the court resumed, whispers filled the gallery. Reynolds would testify, and he did. Under oath, he described the unspoken rules, the pressure from superiors, the rewards for aggressive policing in minority neighborhoods. Each word chipped away at the blue wall, each confession a fracture spreading through the department's carefully built defenses. The lesson here is that silence protects systems, but courage, even from the most unlikely source, can shatter them. Reynolds was no hero, not yet. His testimony came too late for the countless men and women who had suffered before Marcus. But in that moment, his truth was a weapon, and it cut through the shield of denial that had guarded the department for years. The wall was cracking, and once cracks appear, collapse is only a matter of time. Pressure has a way of forcing truth into the open. For Officer Brennan, pressure shattered the mask completely. As evidence piled up statistical disparities, body cam footage, Reynolds' confession, Brennan's composure unraveled. He slammed his fist on the table, his face flushed with fury. "We were doing our jobs," he shouted. "If people just complied, none of this would happen. Always making it about race, always demanding special treatment." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. His attorney tugged at his sleeve, urging silence, but Brennan kept going, his voice dripping with bitterness. "Even you, Judge, thinking your title makes you untouchable. But on the street, you're just another black man. That's the reality." The words hung heavy in the air, raw and unfiltered prejudice laid bare for all to hear. It was the kind of statement no data chart or expert analysis could match. It was pure, unvarnished racism, spoken without apology. Marcus let the silence stretch, the weight of Brennan's outburst sinking into every ear in the room. Then he said softly, "Thank you, Officer Brennan. Your honesty has done what no argument could. The lesson here is that truth has a way of surfacing, even when cloaked in anger." Brennan's rage was not a slip. It was a window into a mindset that had shaped countless interactions, justified countless stops, and excused countless humiliations. And in exposing himself, he had exposed the system. Sometimes, the mask falls not through careful strategy, but through uncontainable fury. And when it does, the truth is undeniable. By afternoon, the courtroom had become something larger than a trial. It was a mirror, reflecting not only two officers' misconduct but an entire system's flaws. Marcus knew the weight of the moment as he prepared to deliver his ruling. "This court finds that Officers Brennan and Reynolds violated Mr. Johnson's constitutional rights," he began, his voice firm. "These violations are not isolated incidents, but symptoms of systemic practices." He ordered Brennan suspended without pay and referred for federal investigation. Reynolds, who had confessed and cooperated, faced discipline but also a mandated program of retraining and accountability. More importantly, Marcus addressed the department itself. He mandated reforms: body cameras that upload automatically, elimination of arrest quotas, performance reviews based on constitutional compliance, and the creation of a civilian oversight board with real authority. "Justice cannot exist without accountability," Marcus said. "But true reform requires more than punishment. It requires transformation." As his gavel struck, the room erupted, some in applause, others in outrage. The police union vowed appeals. Community members wept with relief. And through it all, Marcus sat steady, knowing that his ruling was not the end, but the beginning. The lesson here is that justice is not about revenge. It is about creating structures that prevent the abuse of power, that protect the dignity of every person, regardless of color or class. The gavel had fallen, but its echo would continue to ring. 6 months later, Marcus stood in a community center packed with residents, officers, and activists. The reforms he ordered were now in place: body cams running without interruption, quotas eliminated, oversight committees meeting monthly. Data showed discretionary stops had fallen dramatically, while trust in the community had begun, slowly, to rebuild. Reynolds now mentored younger officers, teaching the lessons he had once ignored. Brennan, once defiant, sat quietly in the back, no longer a symbol of authority but of the painful work of change. And Antoine Johnson, the young man whose courage began it all, spoke to the crowd about pursuing a degree in criminal justice. "I just wanted someone to believe me," he said. "Now, I want to help make sure others don't go through what I did." Marcus listened with pride but also with humility. Change was happening, but it was fragile. He knew systems resist reform, that progress can stall or even reverse. But he also knew something else, that his children could now see hope where once there had only been fear. The lesson here is that justice is not a destination, but a process. It requires vigilance, courage, and commitment, day after day. Marcus's arrest had been humiliating, his dignity stripped under fluorescent lights. But from that humiliation had risen something larger, a movement, a shift, a glimpse of what true equality might look like. And as he closed the meeting with simple words, "The work continues," the crowd rose, not just in applause, but in shared resolve. The story had begun with handcuffs in the night. It ended with hope in the daylight, a reminder that even in the face of injustice, justice always finds a way. And so, this story that began with handcuffs under cold fluorescent lights ends with something far greater hope. Marcus Holloway's journey reminds us that justice isn't about titles, robes, or gavels. It's about dignity, accountability, and the courage to confront a broken system until it begins to heal. Maybe you've experienced moments of injustice yourself, moments where you were misjudged, overlooked, or silenced. If so, I want you to know this: your voice matters. Just like Marcus, your story has the power to spark change, even when the odds seem impossible. Before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of this story spoke to you the most? Drop your reflections in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story resonated, please give it a like. It helps more people discover these conversations about justice, equality, and the kind of society we all deserve. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story. Together, we are building a community that believes in truth, that believes in dignity, and that believes in justice for all. Thank you for listening. Until next time, keep speaking truth to power, and never forget, justice always finds a way.